We begin tonight with a story that has stunned the city. Just over 24 hours ago, a woman riding the CTA Blue Line was attacked and she was set on fire. Tonight, police have a person of interest that they're questioning in the case.
Okay, the passenger is burned all over their body. They're burned all over their body. Pretty bad.
A gruesome attack Monday night on the Blue Line left a young woman burned and the man accused of attacking her on the loose. Witnesses said the woman collapsed after getting off the train at Clark and Lee.
I'm really shocked that happened for no reason. And then plus, I mean, that's where I live. I'm from the west side of Chicago. So I'm always on the Blue Line. And to think someone would do that, but there's been so much security lately.
On November 17th, 2025, at exactly 9:30 in the evening, a young woman sat alone on a Chicago Transit Authority Blue Line train, scrolling through her phone after a long day at work. Within seconds, her entire world and body would be engulfed in flames. Bethany MaGee, just 26 years old, had no idea that the man approaching from behind wasn't just another commuter. He carried something with him, something deadly, something he'd carefully prepared 30 minutes earlier at a nearby gas station. And what he did next was so horrific, so unthinkable, that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend the brutality. Imagine this. You're sitting on public transportation, tired, maybe thinking about dinner or texting a friend. Your back is to the aisle. You're vulnerable, yes, but you're in public. You're supposed to be safe. Trains have cameras. There are other passengers. This is America, not some war zone. Then suddenly, without warning, without provocation, without a single word exchange, you feel liquid pouring over your head, soaking your clothes, filling your nose with the unmistakable smell of gasoline. Before your brain can even process what's happening, there's a spark, a flame, and you're on fire. Bethany didn't just sit there and die. She fought. She ran. While her skin melted and her clothes burned into her flesh, she somehow found the strength to flee that train car, stumbling onto the platform while still ablaze. Two strangers rushed to help, desperately trying to extinguish the flames that were consuming her alive. But here's what makes this even more chilling. The man who did this, he had been arrested 72 times before. 72. He'd been convicted 15 times. Just 3 months earlier, prosecutors literally begged a judge to keep him locked up after he was charged with aggravated battery. Their request was denied. He walked free, fitted with an ankle monitor that did absolutely nothing to stop what came next. Before we go further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Share it with someone who would love it too. This wasn't Bethany's first time taking that train. It was a routine commute, the same route she'd taken countless times before. She had every reason to believe she'd make it home safely that night. Just like always, she had plans, a career, people who loved her, a future that should have stretched decades ahead. Instead, she's now fighting for her life in a hospital bed, with burns covering 60% of her body. Doctors say she'll be there for at least 3 months. 3 months of surgeries, skin grafts, unimaginable pain, and rehabilitation. Her left arm and hand suffered the worst damage. The kind of injuries that don't just heal, they change you forever if you survive at all. And the most disturbing part, this attack wasn't personal. Bethany didn't know her attacker. She'd never seen him before. She didn't cut him off in traffic, didn't reject his advances, didn't owe him money. She was simply in the wrong place when a monster decided to act on his darkest impulses. How does someone just decide to set another human being on fire? What level of evil exists in a person's soul that allows them to purchase gasoline, board a train, select a random victim, and calmly execute an act of pure terror? And perhaps more importantly, how was this man free to do this in the first place? This is the story of Bethany MaGee, a woman whose only crime was going to work and trying to get home. A story that exposes the catastrophic failures of a system that's supposed to protect us. A nightmare that's becoming far too common on America's public transit systems. What happened that night wasn't just an attack on one woman. It was an attack on every single person who's ever felt safe on a train, a bus, or a subway. It shattered the basic assumption that we can move through our cities without being randomly targeted by someone who should have been behind bars. Are you ready to hear the full truth? Because I promise you, it's worse than you think. Bethany MaGee wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who had worked incredibly hard to build a life she was living. 26 years old. That's barely scratching the surface of adulthood. She had her whole existence ahead of her. Marriage, maybe children, career advancement, travel, memories yet to be created. All of it stolen in seconds. Bethany grew up in Upland, Indiana, a small town where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where neighbors wave to each other and community actually means something. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She earned everything she had through determination and education. After high school, she made her way to Purdue University's Polytechnic Institute, one of the most respected technical programs in the Midwest. This wasn't some easy degree. Purdue doesn't hand out diplomas for showing up. She studied hard, graduated, and landed herself a position as a business research analyst at Caterpillar, one of the world's largest heavy machinery manufacturers. When she moved to Chicago for work, she was doing what millions of young professionals do, chasing opportunity in a big city. Chicago isn't cheap. The cost of living is brutal. But Bethany was making it work. She had an apartment, a steady paycheck, and a promising career trajectory. She was living the American dream that so many people work their entire lives trying to achieve. Her family describes her as kind, hardworking, and full of life. The kind of person who lights up a room when she walks in. Someone who remembered your birthday, asked about your day, and genuinely cared about the answer. She wasn't self-absorbed or caught up in drama. She was focused, driven, and deeply loved by everyone who knew her. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't taking unnecessary risks. She was simply commuting home from work on a Monday evening. The Blue Line train was part of her routine, something she'd done dozens, maybe hundreds of times before without incident. It was supposed to be safe, mundane even. Bethany represents every young woman trying to make it in this world. She followed the rules, got an education, found a good job, paid her bills, contributed to society. She deserved to feel safe on that train. She deserved to make it home that night. But Lawrence Reed decided otherwise. Now her family sits in a hospital waiting room, praying she survives injuries that most people wouldn't. They're forced to watch someone they love suffer through unspeakable pain because a system that should have protected her failed catastrophically. They're planning months of rehabilitation instead of holiday dinners. They're preparing for surgeries instead of birthday celebrations. Bethany's story isn't unique because she's extraordinary, though by all accounts, she absolutely is. It's significant because she's ordinary. She's every woman who's ever ridden public transportation alone. Every person who's ever felt that tiny flutter of nervousness when a stranger sits too close or acts strangely on a train. She's proof that doing everything right doesn't guarantee your safety when the system fails to keep dangerous people off the streets. And that's what makes this so terrifying. November 17th, 2025 started like any other Monday for Bethany. She woke up, got ready for work, and headed to her job at Caterpillar. Nothing about that day suggested it would end with her fighting for her life in a burn unit. Meanwhile, across the city, Lawrence Reed was making preparations. Around 9 p.m., surveillance cameras captured him walking into a gas station in Garfield Park. He wasn't there for snacks or cigarettes. He purchased gasoline, not for a car, but for a small container. The kind you can easily carry. The kind you can hide. He filled it carefully, paid, and left. 30 minutes later, he would use that gasoline to destroy a woman's life. Think about that timeline. 30 minutes. That's how long Bethany had left before everything changed. While Reed was buying accelerant, she was probably wrapping up her workday, maybe responding to a few last emails, shutting down her computer. She had no idea that across town, someone was actively planning an act of unspeakable violence. By 9:30 p.m., Bethany was on the Blue Line train near Chicago's Clark/Lake Station. She found a seat, pulled out her phone, and settled in for the ride home. Her back was to the aisle, a position that left her completely vulnerable to anyone approaching from behind. But why would she worry? This was her routine, her normal, just another commute in a long line of commutes. Reed boarded the same train car, carrying his bottle of gasoline. Witnesses later told investigators that nothing seemed unusual at first. He walked down the aisle like any other passenger. No shouting, no obvious signs of aggression. He simply moved through the car until he reached Bethany. She never saw him coming. She was absorbed in her phone, completely unaware that death was standing directly behind her. And then he poured. The gasoline splashed over her head, her shoulders, her back. The smell hit her immediately, that sharp, unmistakable chemical odor that burns your nostrils. Bethany's brain must have been scrambling to understand what was happening. Was this real? Was someone actually dousing her in gasoline on a public train? She didn't have time to process it. Reed produced a lighter. One flick, and Bethany's world became hell. Fire doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care that you're young, that you have dreams, that you've never hurt anyone. It just consumes. And it consumed Bethany with terrifying speed. Her clothes ignited first, then her hair, then her skin. The pain would have been immediate and excruciating. The kind of agony most of us can't even imagine. But here's what separates survivors from victims. Bethany didn't freeze. While flames engulfed her body, while her skin blistered and burned, while other passengers screamed and scattered, she found the strength to move. She ran. Still on fire, she fled that train car and stumbled onto the platform at the next stop. Two strangers finally snapped into action. They rushed toward Bethany and began desperately trying to extinguish the flames. They used their jackets, their hands, whatever they could find. They saved her life in those moments. Because if those flames had burned any longer, Bethany wouldn't have survived long enough to reach the hospital. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the damage was already catastrophic. 60% of her body had been burned, her left arm and hand. The part she likely used to shield her face suffered the most severe injuries, the kind that require multiple surgeries, skin grafts, and months of rehabilitation, the kind that leave permanent scars, both physical and psychological. As paramedics loaded Bethany into an ambulance, Reed was still at the scene. He didn't run. He didn't try to hide. He just stood there, as if what he'd done was perfectly normal, as if he hadn't just attempted to murder an innocent woman in the most brutal way imaginable. What kind of person does this? What goes through someone's mind when they decide that setting another human being on fire is an acceptable action? Was it rage? Psychosis? Pure evil? Or was it something even more disturbing? Complete indifference to human suffering? And here's what keeps me up at night. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a sudden snap of anger. Reed had to plan this. He had to buy the gasoline, carry it onto the train, choose a victim, and execute his plan. Every step required conscious decision-making. He had multiple opportunities to stop, to reconsider, to recognize the monstrous nature of what he was about to do. He chose violence anyway. Bethany MaGee went to work that morning as a successful young professional with her whole life ahead of her. She came home as a burned victim facing months of agony and permanent disfigurement, all because a system designed to protect society failed, and a monster was allowed to roam free. Lawrence Reed, 50 years old, a name that should have been permanently locked away from society long before November 17th ever arrived. When police arrested him at the scene, they weren't meeting Reed for the first time. Far from it. This man had been arrested 72 times. 72 separate occasions where law enforcement had to intervene because of his behavior. He had 15 convictions on his record. 15 times a court found him guilty of criminal conduct. Let that sink in. This wasn't some first-time offender who made a terrible mistake. This was a career criminal who'd been cycling through the system for decades, racking up charges and somehow, inexplicably, remaining free to terrorize the public. But here's where it gets absolutely infuriating. Just 3 months before he set Bethany on fire, Reed was charged with aggravated battery in August 2025. Prosecutors looked at his record, recognized the danger he posed, and specifically requested that he be detained. They asked the court to keep him locked up because they understood what would happen if he walked free. Their request was denied. Reed was released with an ankle monitor and sent back into the community. That ankle monitor didn't stop him from buying gasoline. It didn't stop him from boarding a train. It didn't stop him from selecting Bethany as his victim. It didn't prevent a single second of the horror that followed. It was nothing more than an electronic bracelet on a man who clearly had no intention of following rules. But Reed's pattern of violence didn't start with Bethany. Investigators discovered he'd been escalating for years. Just days before the attack on Bethany, he was suspected of attempting to set the City Hall County building on fire. Days. He was already trying to burn buildings, and nobody stopped him. Go back further. 2020. Reed was a suspect in an attempt to set the James R. Thompson Center on fire. That same year, he was charged with aggravated arson after lighting a government building ablaze just minutes before Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was scheduled to speak inside. Minutes. He could have killed the governor and dozens of others. What was his punishment for attempted murder and terrorism? Probation. He never served prison time. He walked away with a slap on the wrist for trying to burn down a building with people inside. So what was his motive for attacking Bethany? According to investigators, there wasn't one, not in any rational sense. Bethany didn't know him. She'd never interacted with him. She wasn't targeted because of who she was. She was targeted because she was there, available, vulnerable. During his first federal court appearance, Reed's behavior told you everything you needed to know about his mental state. He allegedly shouted, "I plead guilty, I plead guilty, I plead guilty," repeatedly. When the judge informed him the maximum sentence was life in prison, Reed responded, "It's cool, it's cool, it's cool." It's cool? Setting an innocent woman on fire carries a potential life sentence, and his response is, "It's cool?" That's not remorse. That's not even acknowledgement of wrongdoing. That's complete detachment from reality and basic human decency. Reed has now been charged with federal terrorism in connection with the attack. Finally, authorities are treating him like the threat he's always been. But it took Bethany being set on fire for that to happen. And here's the truly horrifying part. Bethany's case isn't isolated. This is part of a nationwide epidemic of brutal, random violence on public transportation. Just 3 months earlier, in August 2025, 23-year-old Irina Zaritska was stabbed to death on a Charlotte train by DeCarlos Brown Jr., another man with a massive criminal history who was released despite prosecutors' objections. Irina was a Ukrainian refugee who fled war only to be murdered on American public transit. Also, in December 2024, 57-year-old Debrina Kawam was set on fire while sleeping on a New York subway. Her attacker, Sebastian Zapata-Calo, not only ignited her but fanned the flames and sat watching as she burned alive. Just like Bethany's case, random, unprovoked, unthinkable. Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, London. The pattern repeats across cities worldwide. Vulnerable people using public transportation are being stabbed, set on fire, pushed onto tracks, and beaten by individuals who should have been institutionalized or incarcerated long ago. What's the common thread? Repeat offenders with extensive criminal histories or severe untreated mental illness being released back into society, where they have access to innocent victims. Systems failing at every level: criminal justice, mental health care, public safety, until someone dies or nearly dies. These aren't accidents. These are preventable tragedies. Every single one of them. How many more Bethanys? How many more Irinas? How many more families destroyed before we acknowledge that something is catastrophically broken? The investigation into Bethany's attack revealed layers of failure that go far beyond one man's violence. What emerged is a damning portrait of systemic collapse, a cascade of missed warnings, ignored red flags, and bureaucratic negligence that enabled a monster to strike. Federal investigators moved quickly, and what they uncovered painted an even more disturbing picture than anyone initially realized. This wasn't just about one horrific attack. Reed had been broadcasting his intentions for years, and every institution designed to stop him had looked the other way. Surveillance footage became crucial evidence. Cameras captured Reed at that Garfield Park gas station, calmly purchasing the gasoline he would use as a weapon 30 minutes later. No nervousness, no hesitation. He knew exactly what he was doing. Investigators tracked his movements from the gas station to the train, documenting every step of his premeditated journey toward violence. The train security cameras recorded the entire attack. Prosecutors now have video evidence showing Reed approaching Bethany from behind, dousing her with accelerant and igniting the flames. They have footage of her desperate escape, her body engulfed in fire as she fled the train car. This isn't circumstantial evidence. This is irrefutable documentation of attempted murder. But here's where the investigation takes a darker turn. When authorities dug into Reed's recent activities, they discovered he'd been systematically targeting public buildings and infrastructure. The attempt to burn City Hall days before attacking Bethany wasn't random chaos. It was part of an escalating pattern of arson attacks on government property. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy made a public statement that sent shockwaves through political circles. He declared bluntly that this attack could have been prevented had Reed remained in custody. Think about that. A federal official openly acknowledging that bureaucratic decisions directly enabled this woman's suffering. That's not typical political hedging. That's an admission of catastrophic failure. The August aggravated battery charge that should have kept Reed locked up? Details emerge about that case too. Reed had violently assaulted someone just months earlier, displaying the exact kind of dangerous behavior that predicted what he'd do to Bethany. Prosecutors presented his entire criminal history to the court. 72 arrests, 15 convictions, multiple violent incidents. They made their case crystal clear. This man is a threat to public safety. The judge released him anyway with ankle monitoring. That decision directly led to Bethany being set on fire. One person's choice, one moment of misplaced leniency, and a young woman's life was destroyed. Federal prosecutors charged Reed with terrorism, not just assault or attempted murder. That distinction matters. Terrorism charges acknowledge that his attack wasn't simply violence against one individual. It was an assault designed to create fear throughout an entire community. Every person who rides Chicago's Blue Line now carries the knowledge that they could be next. That's the definition of terrorism. Violence intended to instill widespread fear. During interrogation, Reed showed no remorse whatsoever. No explanation for why he chose Bethany. No justification for his actions. Just that chilling torture behavior. I plead guilty repeated like a mantra, followed by it's cool when facing life imprisonment. Investigators found themselves dealing with someone fundamentally disconnected from normal human emotion. Mental health experts brought in to evaluate Reed struggled with his case. Was this psychosis? Antisocial personality disorder? Something else entirely? Whatever the clinical diagnosis, the practical reality was undeniable. This man had been demonstrably dangerous for years, and every system meant to contain him had failed. The revelation that stunned even seasoned investigators was the 2020 arson at the government building. The one where Reed lit a fire minutes before Governor Pritzker was scheduled to speak. He essentially attempted to assassinate a sitting governor through arson, and his punishment was probation. No prison time. No mandatory psychiatric treatment. Nothing that would have prevented him from buying gasoline 5 years later and using it on Bethany. How does that happen? How does someone attempt to kill a governor and walk free? The answer lies in an overburdened court system, progressive bail reform policies implemented without adequate safeguards, and a fundamental misunderstanding of recidivism patterns among violent offenders. Public outcry has been massive. Chicago residents are demanding answers. Why was Reed free? Who made the decision to release him? What accountability exists for the officials whose choices enabled this attack? Transportation Secretary Duffy's comments open the floodgates for criticism of Chicago's criminal justice policies, with officials at every level now facing intense scrutiny. The federal terrorism charge ensures Reed won't slip through the cracks this time. Federal prosecutors have resources and determination that often exceed local systems. They're building an airtight case, and with video evidence, witness testimony, and Reed's own courtroom admissions, conviction seems inevitable. But conviction doesn't undo what happened to Bethany. It doesn't erase her scars or restore her sense of safety. It doesn't give back the months she'll spend in rehabilitation or heal the psychological trauma that will haunt her forever. The investigation also sparked broader inquiries into transit security across major American cities. How many other Lawrence Reeds are riding trains right now? How many repeat offenders with violent histories have access to vulnerable commuters? These questions don't have comfortable answers. Some cities responded by increasing police presence on public transportation. Others implemented new surveillance systems. But the fundamental problem remains. You can't arrest someone for a crime they haven't committed yet, even when their history screams that violence is inevitable. That's the impossible balance, civil liberties versus public safety. Reed had rights, too, even after 72 arrests. The system tried to respect those rights while protecting society. It failed spectacularly at both. As of today, Bethany MaGee remains hospitalized in critical condition. She survived initial trauma, but survival is just the beginning of her nightmare. Doctors estimate she'll remain in the hospital for at least 3 months, undergoing surgeries, skin grafts, and intensive rehabilitation. The burns covering 60% of her body require constant medical attention, her left arm and hand. The injury is so severe they may never fully function again, demand specialized reconstructive procedures that will take years, not months. 3 months minimum in a hospital bed. That's 3 months of unimaginable physical pain. 3 months away from her job, her home, her normal life. 3 months of watching her family suffer alongside her, helpless to ease their anguish. And when those 3 months end, the real work begins. Physical therapy, psychological counseling, learning to live in a body that's been permanently altered by someone else's violence. Lawrence Reed sits in federal custody, finally behind bars where he belonged decades ago. He's awaiting trial on terrorism charges that could put him away for life. His "it's cool" attitude in court has been documented, preserved for prosecutors to show a jury exactly what kind of person they're dealing with. There's no bail this time, no ankle monitor, no judge willing to make the catastrophic mistake of releasing him again. The legal proceedings will take months, maybe years. Reed will have his day in court, afforded every protection the Constitution guarantees. Meanwhile, Bethany gets no such timeline for justice. Her suffering doesn't pause while lawyers file motions and judges review evidence. Every single day is a battle against pain, against infection, against despair. Her family has been overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from strangers across the country. People who've never met Bethany but recognize that what happened to her could happen to anyone. Prayer requests flooded social media. Fundraising efforts emerged to help cover medical expenses that insurance won't touch. The community of Upland, Indiana, her hometown, has rallied around the MaGee family, organizing vigils and sending messages of love. But support doesn't heal third-degree burns. Prayers don't restore damaged tissue. Money can't buy back the life Bethany had before November 17th. Chicago's criminal justice system faces a reckoning. Politicians who champion bail reform without considering cases like Reed's are now scrambling to explain how this happened. Transportation officials are implementing new security measures on CTA trains, measures that should have existed long before Bethany paid the price for their absence. Task forces have been formed. Policies are being reviewed. Committees are investigating. All of it too late for Bethany. Other victims of transit violence watch this case closely. Irina Zarutska's family, still grieving their daughter who was stabbed on a Charlotte train. Debrina Kawam's relatives, who lost their flames on a New York subway, they all see themselves in Bethany's story. They all wonder if their loved ones' deaths will finally force systemic change, or society will simply move on to the next tragedy without learning anything. The federal terrorism charge against Reed represents a shift in how authorities handle these attacks. For too long, random violence on public transit was treated as isolated incidents. Bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Now prosecutors are acknowledging the truth. These attacks terrorize entire communities. When someone sets a woman on fire on a train, they're not just attacking that woman. They're attacking every person who will think twice before boarding public transportation. They're attacking the social contract that says we should be able to move through our cities safely. Reed's trial will be watched nationally. Legal experts predict a conviction is virtually guaranteed given the video evidence and his own admissions. The question isn't guilt, it's sentencing. Will he spend the rest of his life in prison? Will mental health factors influence his punishment? Will the court system finally acknowledge that 72 arrests should have resulted in permanent incarceration long ago? For Bethany, none of those answers matter right now. She's focused on survival, on taking the next breath, enduring the next surgery, making it through the next hour of rehabilitation. Her dreams of career advancement at Caterpillar feel distant. The simple joy of commuting home from work without fear seems impossible to reclaim. But here's what I know about survivors. They're stronger than anyone imagines. Bethany ran off that train while her body was on fire. She fought for her life when giving up would have been easier. That same strength will carry her through recovery, through the trauma, through the years of healing ahead. She'll bear scars that tell a story she never wanted to live. But she'll bear them as a survivor, not a victim. Because Lawrence Reed may have taken her sense of safety, may have stolen months of her life, may have left permanent marks on her body, but he didn't take her life, and that matters. Rest in peace to those who weren't as fortunate as Bethany. To Irina Zarutska, to Debrina Kawam, to Myrna Rawls and every other soul lost to senseless violence on public transit. You were loved. You mattered. Your deaths weren't in vain if they finally force the changes that prevent the next tragedy. And to Bethany MaGee, the world is watching your fight. The world is rooting for your recovery. The world sees your strength. You deserve justice. You deserve healing. You deserve a future where November 17th becomes a distant memory rather than a defining moment. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What needs to change to prevent attacks like this? Should repeat offenders with violent histories face mandatory detention? How do we balance civil liberties with public safety? Share your perspective, because this conversation matters. And if Bethany's story moved you, if you believe she deserves justice, hit that like button and subscribe to Dark Truth Files. These stories need to be told. These victims need to be remembered. And these systemic failures need to be exposed. Until next time, stay safe out there, because the world can be cruel, but it can also be kind. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us demand better, things will finally change.